The so much of the idea of metaphysics and the practice of the science of mind is tending to our garden of thought. For anybody that has read the book Science of Mind, or this thing called You, or other works of Ernest Holmes or Emma Curtis Hopkins, if you're familiar with that name, Mary Baker Eddy, some of these other people, is so much to do with tending to our thought, our thinking. That there's a mental science that goes along with the science of mind that says if we tend to our garden of thought and tend to it affirmatively, tend to it constructively, tend to it powerfully, then our lives will experience a greater freedom in our lives. Because what we know, I mean, just real talk here is that there's a tremendous amount of anxiety that's caused by thinking, that's caused by thought. Yeah? You feel it. You feel, if you're an empath at all, you have a sense of, I'm reading a book. I started reading a book. I can't say I'm reading it. I mean, at what point are you reading a book? If I don't read a chapter a day, am I reading it? I'm looking at it. I'm looking at a book. It's called The Anxiety Generation, about our children. It's called, and the feeling, a pervading feeling of anxiety. Why? Because somehow we're engaged in a agreement of fear. Not me, I heard. That overall, and I love that, not me. That's what Ernest Holmes would say, not here. Not here, not now. That's what he's saying in the book. That there's, if we look at kind of a general, one of the things that we actually a place for us to be in the laboratory of thought is considering how much anxiety there is, and it's got to be based on some sort of fear. In this section of the book, I want to read you another. Bear with me for just a moment. Another section here. Anyway, he talks about that somehow these feelings of fear and anxiety are somehow rooted in an idea of rejection. And it's not just necessarily rejection from another person, but it could be a rejection from God. Old school theology, that somehow there's a God over here, as I've mentioned, and that I'm over here, and that it not only sits in judgment of me, but more often than not, that it's not a good judgment, that it's an assessment is less than beautiful, life-giving, wholeness. Now, I may be preaching to the choir in here, and I hope that I am. And yet, somehow, what I know about the human condition is that as long as we're alive, we're going to be dealing with the human condition. And that there are times in our lives when each one of us are afraid. And there are times in our lives when each one of us feel anxious. And there are times in our lives when perhaps we feel rejection. I just went through a big bout of this. Thank you, Mary. I mean, that's all I want right there. I'm healed. I'm healed, baby. That's all I need is like, oh, that's too bad, right? God, I love you. Where things don't necessarily go your way. You ever had that? Things don't go my way, and then what do I do with it? And for me, in this last episode that I had, I felt this sense of rejection, and it affected me. It affected my confidence. It affected kind of my reason for being a little bit. But here I am. And what we're called to do is move through these things with as much self-forgiveness, with as much grace, with as much turning attention to that which is true, you know, with as much possibility thinking as possible, and yet still honor that from time to time as a human being, I have to dig down extra deep to tend to my garden of thought because I get caught up. I feel lost from time to time. Anybody feel lost from time to time? Yes, you feel lost from time to time. Feel anxious from time to time? Get afraid from time to time? Feel like you're wondering just from time to time, not saying like all the way, like all the time, but from time to time, wonder, what is this life for? What is actually going on here? What am I up to? Who am I? Is this a worthy project? I've put my heart, blood, sweat, and tears into it, and then somehow it doesn't come to fruition. Like, what am I up to? We have to tend to the garden of thought, tend to the garden of heart as well, and realize the connection between the two, between the head and the heart. Who was it that said, when we pray, drop your head into your heart? Somebody said that. I drop my head into my heart and pray from that standpoint. So I want to share just a couple of ideas this morning about what it means to tend to the garden of our thinking. And for those of us that have been around metaphysics for some period of time, we know what that means. You know that change your thinking, change your life. As my thinking goes, so goes my life. We've been around for a while. I don't think we can ever practice the fundamentals enough, though.
Amen.
Yeah, you know, I think coming back to the fundamentals often, we can get into lofty ideas of a vision for your life and the possibility of, you know, I don't know, floating through the universe in consciousness and some of these other things that sound really sexy to me too, but it also sounds like a checkout sometimes, you know? Like I'm not keeping my feet on the ground. I'm not honoring where I'm at. Like I'm still in this human skin bag. I'm right here with all of that it means, the feelings and the emotions and the victories and the defeats. And you know that sometimes when we get too far down the road in metaphysics, we forget that we're a human being and that it's complex and that it's challenging and that it's hard and that there's a lot of meaning we put into it and wanting to be vigilant of the meaning that I do put into it. And so I don't think we can practice the fundamentals enough is all I'm saying. So I just wanted to have a Sunday and more Sundays, and it's why I read from Ernest Holmes a fair amount of us just being in the fundamentals of something. You know I talk about this a fair amount, but you know, the first thing you do when I'm a sports guy and I love basketball growing up, and the first thing you do is learn how to hold the ball. You know, you kind of get familiar with the tools that you're dealing with. You know, you learn how to hold the ball and then you realize that it can bounce off the floor, that it's got air in it, it can bounce. You know, I'm talking like fundamentals. And that you get control of bouncing it with one hand. And then it's a revelation when you get control of bouncing it with your off hand, your non-dominant hand. And the world that opens up just by practicing fundamentals. Oh, I can fool the other team by dribbling this way, but they might not know, oh, I can also dribble this way. So I've got a skill set that I've developed, you know, and that's the fundamentals of spiritual mind science, the science of the mind. Have you noticed that your thinking and your prevailing feelings about life tend to generate the experience of your livingness?
Yes.
Reflect on that from time to time, you know, just reflect on it from time to time that the seeds that I plant in my garden of thought tend to grow. And it's not every single seed grows. It doesn't work that way. Take heart. It's not every single thought of fear or anxiety. But I have to be aware when there's someone earlier this morning, I think it was you, Gene, talked about momentum. Have to be aware of the momentum of my feelings, the momentum of my thinking. Am I generally afraid about life? Am I generally concerned that things aren't going to be okay? Or am I generally have a hopeful feeling? I asked you at the beginning of the service, do you feel hopeful this morning? That means something. Do I generally feel hopeful about life and the world? And time out, quick commercial break. Do you know that your feeling of hopefulness actually means something to the world? Do you know that? And if you don't know that your feeling of hopefulness about the world, it was a revelation when I became a dad. Duh. But it was a revelation as far as like the world. there's this show called The Last of Us on what's it called? It's not HBO anymore. It's called Max, I guess. The Last of Us, about some big disease happens and there's only a few people left and they're on this journey to, well, we don't know exactly to what yet, because hopefully there's a season 2 coming out at some point. But they're on some sort of journey, right? And shoot, I got so cute there that I forgot what I was going to say. Being a dad was a revelation about, thank you so much. We encourage participation. It's helpful to the minister. There's a scene in there where there's this one episode and it talks about the love affair between these two people. It shows the love affair between these two men and how they fall so deeply in love together in the midst of chaos and confusion. And it's a beautiful, beautiful episode. And this one guy says, and he was a staunch kind of individualist. He's like, I can take care of myself. I know how to do that really, really, really well. And then he falls in love with this man. And he says at one point, he says, I wasn't scared until I fell in love with you. That's poetic, isn't it? And it's almost, there's this interesting experience for me of being a father where before I became a dad, I wasn't so concerned. It was me, myself, and I mostly. It was me, myself, and I mostly. And then I became concerned. And then I started becoming more concerned about my thinking. I became more concerned about the tendency of my feeling, because what I started to realize is that my presence makes a difference for her. That the tendency of my thought and the tendency of my feeling, tending to the garden of my thought, tending to the garden of my life, makes a difference for her. And each of us tending to the garden of our thought and tending to the garden of our feeling makes a difference for humanity. It makes a difference. It does something. It creates some momentum in the way that I would say that we want to be going. So the first thought that I want to share with you, as far as the official talk of the morning, is know what you want to experience. And that will determine the seeds that you plant. But we have to have dominion over our minds, you see. We have to have some dominion over our feeling and determining how we're going to feel into life, and the seeds that we're planting life determine the experience that you want to have. Do you want to have experience of freedom? Do you want to have experience of plenty? Do you want to have experience of financial success? Do you want to have an experience of life-givingness? Do you want to have an experience of hope? Then we have to plant those seeds. And what does it mean? That we have to be concerned with the momentum of our thinking, with the general tendency of our thinking. We have to be concerned with the general tendency of our feelings and how we're feeling into life. And this is something that we have control over, which is so very little, but it is something that we have control over. Do you know that you have control over your mind? Because sometimes it seems like we don't, but we do. Especially these empaths, like I'm empathic too, and I just feel, and I can't stop the avalanche of feeling that's coming over me. And yes, I can. Yes, I can have dominion over my thinking and dominion over my feeling. It's one of the few things that I can control. And it's one of the few things that you can control. What type of experience do you want to have in your life? Do you want to constantly be subject to the prevailing thought, to the cultural creatives that are creating whatever they're creating in the culture, whether it's something that feels life-giving or something that feels life-robbing? Do I just want to be at a whim? Or do I actually want to have some sort of dominion over it? I know what the answer is, but we need to ask ourselves this. All of us, because of where we come from, one of the fundamental frictions that we experience in life is the experience of being a human being getting its hooks in us, and the friction that is created, the rub that's created between that and knowing who we really are. Knowing that we are of the Spirit, knowing that we are of a greater possibility, knowing that we are of I am more than this, an idea that I am more than this. But we get caught up in whether it's something that's happening with a friend or something that's happening in the culture, and we kind of get lost in it sometimes. But do you know that you have dominion over your mind? You do. And that you have dominion over your tendency of feeling. Determine the experience that you want to have in your life and be about cultivating the garden in that way. Now, I'm not a farmer. I'm not a gardener, but I know there's basic principles that go into it, right? I mean, there's something about you want to till the soil a little bit. You know, you want to make sure you've got some good soil. And we have good soil, gang. I mean, it's an immutable, we're already working with good soil. The soil is an immutable, it's this thing that's been called the law, it's been called the subjective mind, it's called the yes machine, it's called the cop. It's called that thing. And that was an inside joke. I apologize. It's not called the cop, all right? But we have fertile soil that we're dealing with already. It's the immutable soil of what you think becomes. The tendency of your thought grows into being. We know this. We can look at the reverse blueprint of our lives and see that's how it works. So know already that we're working with fertile soil. And that's a blessing, because then I know that the seeds that I plant are going to grow. How I feel into life is going to be the tendency of my experience. And this is good news, because guess what, gang? It's something that we have control over. So we can begin to change our thinking, change our life right now. Say something with me. Say, change my thinking, change my life. This is good news. Turn to somebody and say, this is good news. It's good news. This is good news. I just wanted to see some smiles on some faces. Yeah. It's fundamental, right? I know it's just an old parlor trick of kind of getting the energy flowing a little bit. This is good news. All right? So we want to be aware of the experience we want to have, and those are the seeds that we're going to be planting. And so that's why it's important when we go to the seed store that we're purchasing the seeds that we want to plant and not the seeds that we don't want to plant. So I want to be mindful of the seeds that I'm planting in the soil. And so I want to be mindful too of the information that I'm bringing into myself. I want to be mindful of the nutrients that I'm taking in. Again, this is fundamental stuff, gang, right? Fundamental. I want to be mindful of the nutrients. I want to be mindful of the stuff that I'm putting into my brain, which is going to affect the tendency of my thinking, right? So we know the harvest that we want, we plant seeds accordingly. We tend to the soil deliberately. Tend to the soil deliberately. Tend to the law of mind deliberately. Deliberately. It's a fun word to say. Say it. Deliberately. It's kind of cool, right? Polysybolic. Yes. Deliberately. Syllabic. Did I say symbolic? Syllabic. Multiple syllables. And that's better, right? Syllabic. And then along the way, here's part of the fun thing about it. Part of the fun thing about gardening, tending to your garden, is to welcome serendipity as well. That's a blessing that comes along when we're like, oh, that's not necessarily what I was planting in the seed, but ooh, there's a good looking fruit that I want to harvest. Welcome serendipity, an accidental blessing while we're farming and tending to our garden of thought. Do you know that if your momentum is heading in the direction of planting seeds that are life-giving and the seeds that you want to experience of joyfulness and hope and beauty and well-being and these things, that along the way we're going to experience happy accidents? Grace, many words for it. But we'll experience these moments of serendipity while we're tending to our garden of thought. I wasn't expecting that, but that's pretty cool. I wasn't expecting that, but that's pretty cool. And here's the other side of that coin is when we experience those moments maybe that we weren't expecting that are like, oh, that's not what I was expecting. We can handle those with grace as well. That's not necessarily what I was expecting. I don't necessarily like the look of that. We can handle those with grace as well. Why? Because we're tending to ourselves deliberately and constantly. We're fit instruments. We're fit thinkers. We're not lazy. We're deliberate. We keep working it. And the last piece is when you're experiencing your harvest, is to share your harvest generously. When you're harvesting your good and you're experiencing the blessings of your life, share them with others. Share your harvest. Isn't it fun to sit down at a table and share a bounty with a group of people? For some of us, maybe more than others. Some of us might be a little more individualistic than others, and that's great. But find ways, even in a kind word, in an empowered thought, in a moment of truth, to share your harvest generally. What does that do? It elevates the entire consciousness of humanity. And I'm telling you, when we elevate the entire consciousness of humanity, or at least our neighborhood, or at least our household, if nothing else, we start with our household and sharing generously of our harvest, even within our household, and then it can begin to kind of waft out a little bit. We're all gaining from that. And then we find that we're living in an environment that is more life-giving. And then what's going to happen? Less moments of anxiety, less moments of collective fear, more moments of joy, more moments of celebration, more moments of safety, more moments of beauty. Tend to your garden of thought. I personally need to be reminded of this daily. This is how much I need to practice the fundamentals daily. There's a reason that in the great prayer that Jesus offered to his disciples, it was said, give me this day my daily bread. There's a reason. Today's all we've got. This is the one. The most important day of your life. This is the most important day of our lives. Sounds significant? Yeah. It ought to be in some ways, but we can also hold it lightly. I need to be reminded every day. I'm just standing up here reminding myself of a bunch of stuff. Thanks for coming in this morning. Appreciate you being here. Amen. Just reminding myself, I need to tend to my garden of thought every single day. And I want you to join me in that endeavor. I'd like for you to join me in that because we're creating a bunch of individuals that are getting more and more free. And we're creating a community of individuals that are getting more and more free. You get it. You get it? You get it. That's what I have to share with you today, and so it is.